Can you tilt your mic a little, Kathy?
To me?
Yes, tilt.
Like that?
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you sure? I'm covered.
Mine is good. Okay.
Are we good?
Yes, ma'am. So, it's just one thing. I'll just leave.
I don't like that.
It sounds like it's in the Bible. You're gonna have to watch.
I'm just here. Just like wake at me. Like, no, that's not it.
I mean, Rebecca, are you sure? Are you sure you
think
feel
about
that way?
it.
I'm
Let's
not
think
sure.
about
I
it.
just
Let's
teach
talk
children
about that
like
a little
that's
bit. Oh yeah, no, it's good. It's all good. You got this. You got this. Well, hey everybody! Today at the table we have Logan Ball, Rebecca Jones, and Kathy Walters, and we're going through a series where we're talking about our benediction, which comes from Psalm 19. Last week I said Psalms, but it's just one psalm. And the benediction is actually the very last verse of in the chapter. And this week is. It's not week 2, but it's our second part. Last time we talked about the verses 1 through 6, and it was all about God making himself known through creation. And so last week, I'm going to keep saying last week, so y'all just nod and smile at me every time I say it. Last week, no. On the last podcast, TLT asked what makes a series. Do y'all know what makes a series? How do you know if it's a series? He said, can you have a 2-part series?
Does it have to be 3 to be a series?
That's what we were asked. He asked that question. And
Yeah.
now, well, I said, yes, it can be a 2-part series. But then I went home and the English teacher came out and I'm like, wait a minute. You have to put commas to make it a series. So, no, it can't be a 2-part series. So I stand corrected. It cannot be 2-part series. It's got to have 3 or more. So that just
Makes sense.
wanted to correct myself there. And I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. So I started last week and I said, I had never done a benediction until I came to Family Church. Mm-hmm. We had, which I grew up in a church and then I came to Family Church. So I don't have like this vast experience of going to millions and millions of churches. But I had never done a benediction at the end of service, and I kind of thought, well, this sounds weird. Mm-hmm. What has been y'all's experience? Like, I know that both of you have been at other churches besides Family Church. Had you ever said a benediction at the end of service, or were you familiar with this, or was this weird to you too?
I'll go. I had not done one ever at our other church. I went there since I was in 6th grade, and I don't remember going to. We went to other churches before that, but I don't really remember them. But we never had, and so I remember us visiting Family Church before Jake was hired, and at the end of service, whoever was leading that led that, and I'm like, oh, we're standing. Oh, what is going? Are we Catholic? I just had no idea what was going on, and we're doing that where we're just watching and nodding because we don't know what to say, and so it was very different.
Did I just agree to something?
Yeah, no, which we were not, and so we had not agreed yet. So we're like looking around, like what is going on right now? So, but anyway, so. I mean, it was just very different for us. And we didn't even know, they said benediction. And I'm like, what does that word mean? I didn't even know. I had no idea. We had no prior experience. Mm-hmm. So
I didn't either with benediction. I looked that up when we decided to do this 3-part series.
Gotcha.
What is a benediction? So I had to look up what that even meant. So
Yeah, I think my experience is probably similar. Like we had never done a benediction before, and only been in 2 churches. I think probably the closest thing to that would be, I think at some point in one of the youth groups I was a part of, it was kind of like we should have a verse or a saying or something that kind of unifies us, something that kind of puts us on course for what we're trying to do. But I don't know if that ever really came together and stuck quite like the benediction here at Family Church.
Right, yeah. So do you know what a benediction is? Did you look it up? Well, I did. It's a blessing. It's something a blessing that you send forth, which, I mean, in the last podcast, Terry actually said that, for him, it feels like it's almost a challenge. Our specific
Yeah.
benediction, the verse that we use, feels like may the words of my mouth, it's almost like, whew,
Right.
let's do this,
That's
guys.
what it has become for me
Right.
when I say that, is a reminder that, yes, our church service is over, but now I'm about to go represent Christ to everywhere else. And this
Right.
is how I need to do it.
Right.
So,
So, in the last podcast, like I said, we were talking about creation and God being made known through His creation, which was super easy to talk about because you can just look around and see and know, that God created everything. But this one, and Brittany brought out last time this really important thing was like general knowledge of God. And the verses today that we're looking at are verses 7 through 11. Did I get that right? Yeah, good. Phew. Nailed it. And this is like specific knowledge of God. And I sat and thought about that for a little bit. And it's so true. When we look at creation, we can know God exists in that He created all these things. But we don't have that specific knowledge of who God is. And we know we have scripture. God wants to be known. He wants us to know who He is. And He has given us His word. And so that's kind of like what the verses are all about that we're talking about today, is just God being known through His law. And so I'm just going to start out with what it says here. Some of the things that really stood out to me are, all of the words that were used to describe His law, His instructions, and things that we've talked about this a couple of times. This was written by David or his son. Maybe he sang it. I don't know. Maybe he was singing it. And so, I mean, this is Old Testament. This is that he was under the law. And he's saying that the instructions are perfect. They revive the soul. Trustworthy, they're wise. They make you wise. They're right. They bring joy to the heart. They're clear, which I thought was interesting. They give insight. They're true. They're fair. They're more desirable than gold. Sweeter than honey. They're a warning, and if you obey them, there's a great reward. Anyway, those are some of the things that I circled because I thought, wow, these are some big descriptions, So just as you were reading it, as you were preparing for the podcast, what are some things that were going through your mind? What were you thinking when you saw these verses? Any of that stand out to you?
I think for me, to your point, like it's lofty language. Like it's
yes,
when you talk about perfection, like that's
Right.
not just hey, this is good. It's like, no, there's no flaw in this at all. So it's pretty lofty.
Right. And I mean, when we think about perfection, all we know is God, right? Jesus on the earth, perfect God. And that's all we can relate it to immediately, Yeah.
when I first read this, and just now as I'm reading it again, it makes me think of just the way David is describing this law. Like, I'm still like wrapping my mind around it at this moment. It made me think, this is not going to seem like it's connected, but it is. But the other
Okay,
day,
we'll take it. It's okay. We'll find
I'm
some
just
connectors
thinking of
somewhere.
this. I'm just thinking.
You just tell us what's on your mind, Rebecca.
I will. So it has to do with our sweet daughter, Naomi. But the other day I was inside cooking or cleaning, and Jake was outside with her, and she came inside and she was all teary-eyed, like her little eyes were puffy, and she had those big tears running down her face. And I'm like, what's wrong, Naomi? And she looked at me and she just like poked her lip out and went, Daddy spanked me, and like just like that, and just sad, and just I'm hurt and all of these things. And I'm like, well, why did Daddy spank you? And she said something about not listening, which no surprise. And we talked about obeying and all of those things. But like, that is I know she's 2 and I'm using her as an example, but that's how most of us view discipline, is we're just sad about it. We're just hurt by it. But when David is talking about God's law right here, he's talking about it with such love and reverence. Like, it revives me, it makes me wise, it brings me joy, it enlightens me. And I think we don't view that way sometimes. You know, like we don't like discipline, we don't like being humbled, and those are hard things.
Right.
But if we love God, we view his law more like David does, and not just like a thing that hurts us and, you know, makes us struggle and those kind of things. So, that's what's coming to my mind right now.
Well, and you saying that, this is one of the things, Jonathan and I were actually talking about this yesterday, because when I was trying to figure out, you know, how do you approach these verses and really talk about them, and it's kind of difficult. And that's one of the things that we were talking about. He said, you know, the law it was there to show God's righteousness. The law actually reveals who God is. It reveals his righteousness. It reveals his holiness. It, you know, it's not our inability to keep it because we weren't under that law, but the people who were under the law, the Jewish people who had the law, the inability to keep it does not negate its perfection.
Right.
It is who God is.
Right.
You know, it revealed who he was, who he is in his perfection. And so, you know, obeying is sometimes about loving, you know, who it is that's given the law.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Absolutely. We talk about that a lot at home. If you love me, you'll obey my commandments.
Right.
That's in there.
Right.
And it's like,
Right.
we've watched something in small groups recently. And it was talking about parenting. It said a lot of times when you're parenting your child, you're talking to everybody in the room, even yourself.
Yes.
And I thought that's a good point. A lot of times when I'm talking to the girls about obedience and how, you know, God values obedience and he wants your obedience. But a lot of times I find like, I'm talking to myself too. You know,
Yes.
like,
Right,
Absolutely.
right. How many times when we're getting on to our kids, we're going, wow,
oh man.
Lord, I think you're really talking to me here. This is for me, isn't it?
Yes.
But something that sparked, I think, just a connection to me too was we'd recently been in Romans.
Yes.
And where I think it's Romans 7 maybe, where it talks about, you know, the law is good.
Yes.
It reveals the sin. you know?
Yes.
And he says, I wouldn't have known sin apart from the law.
Right.
But is the law bad? No, the law's good. And to me, I kind of made that connection between the two.
Yeah, I know. And again, Jonathan and I were having this conversation, and I was like, how do we talk about the law as Gentiles?
Yeah.
You know, that we're never under the law, and what does that mean, and how do we read these, and what, you know? And he's like, Kathy, just read Galatians. I'm like, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Well, I'll just go read Galatians. But I mean, when you read, I mean, we know that Jesus fulfilled the law, and so and the law, it tells us the law is good. Our inability to keep it doesn't determine its goodness.
Right.
It was sin, you know, and so it's just interesting to think about, you know. I want to go back to these lofty words.
Yeah.
Whenever you said that word lofty, I thought, wow, you just hit the nail on the head with that. When I think about perfection and trustworthy and wise and right and joy to the heart, clear, and I want to go back to that. The commands of the Lord are clear. Do you think David really understood that? We were kind of talking about that a little bit, you know. Did he really understand? You know, why would David use these words? What made him choose these words? Any thoughts? You're going, Kathy, we can't answer that question. I have no idea.
Well, for me, you kind of you gave us some notes, and it was funny because I read through the notes. Then I kind of went and I was doing my own thing, and I was like, oh, I think I'm kind of onto something. And I looked back at the notes, and you would put it in the notes. I was like, well, maybe it was just there the whole time. But when you talk about creation, and creation points to the fact that God exists,
Right.
that God's there. But then you come to the law, and law's, like I said, specific knowledge,
Right.
to God's character. And it's like he's describing the law here, but I think you can also kind of read it as he's describing God. He's telling us who
Yes.
God is.
Right.
And in fact, just these little things that I read one time, that anytime Lord's capitalized, it's referencing like God's name, Yahweh.
Yes.
And a lot of these, this is just where my head went. Maybe you can't do this with the Bible, but I did it. I read it as, it says the Lord is perfect. So Yahweh is perfect.
Yes.
It says the instruction of the Lord is perfect. But if you just take in the end there, it's Yahweh is perfect. Yahweh is trustworthy. Yahweh is right. He is radiant. He is pure.
Right.
And so you go, like you said, the lofty words, but it's like, when you're describing God, can you be lofty enough? You know, it's like the words can't even do it justice. But for us, we're like, oh, these are big words. This is the top of what we can even imagine and think of. And
Right. And that's what we have to do.
yeah,
Because as we're reading this, you're exactly right. I mean, because it even says in verse 9, and I thought this was neat because it changes. It's talking about instructions and the commandments and the commands. And then it gets to verse 9, it says, reverence for the Lord is pure, lasting forever. And so at that point, you can know that they're talking about the Lord. This is the character, and the law is the character and nature of the Lord, of God.
Right.
And so when we know and follow the law, we are knowing and following God. And so, exactly. Can we get too lofty?
Right, yeah.
No. And that's neat. Any personal revelations as obviously you've told us a little bit about your kids and anything else personally about you? I mean,
Yeah.
as you read these.
One thing that I noted, I guess, when I was telling Kathy, I got all this. I opened my Bible to read it in my Bible, and I had highlighted these exact things already, like months ago, which was kind of cool to me.
that's always cool. Yeah.
And like circled some of these big words.
She started it off with, I sat down with those verses and I had no idea what I was going to say. I have no idea. So I thought, well, maybe if I look in my Bible.
And there it was, like circled, highlighted, a note, and I'm like, okay, I got something to say now.
Exactly.
So anyway, thank you, whoever I was listening to and highlighted this. One thing that I guess the speaker I was listening to pointed out with these verses is I wrote deferred reward for the ultimate treasure. And so I think in reading this and in studying this, it's like this is it. Are we going to attain it perfectly? Absolutely not. Not while we're here. But if I seek this, if this is my desire more than gold and more than honey, I have to set down treasure here, I have to hold this law to be my treasure, and I will one day, thanks to Jesus, receive it in heaven one day. And so to me, like when I read about this and this law and just God's word in general, like that is where my treasure lies. That is where I don't even know, like my hope, like everything. But I have to it does call me to set some things down here and defer that reward, and I work a lot with kids, of course, and have young kids. And when I read it again this morning, it made me think of that like little kid challenge where they would like set candy down in front of them and walk away and see if they could wait, and we haven't done that with ours, but I have wanted to because I've wondered what they would do. I think I know what they would do. But, you know what I mean? But, like, that's silly. But, like, are we able to do that? Am I able to set something down or not attain something here in this life that everybody else says is sweet and wonderful for the true treasure to follow this, you know? So,
Right.
yeah.
I know that's really good, Rebecca. I know when I'm sitting here reading this and thinking about David, a question that keeps rolling in my mind is, when we read this, when David wrote it, he was just, or sang it, whatever he did, he was just doing it. And he was, we already know that David was a man after God's own heart. And so he was chasing hard after God. Everything that we read, we see that. But then we also see failure after failure after failure, and we have the whole picture. Like we have the entire Bible. And so when I'm reading this, I do have that moment. What are your thoughts when you think about who David is, the mistakes that he made, and him saying this? Like, obviously there was a disconnect somewhere, but what does that make you think on a personal level? Like, does that, am I making sense with my question? Like,
I think so. Well, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You're good.
Who's
let's talk
going
at the
first?
same
Rock, paper,
time.
scissors. No. Yeah.
Ladies first.
I don't know, and you may know, Kathy, like, I don't know if anybody knows, like, the timeline of, like, when this would have been written in comparison to David's life. Like, if this was written, like, later in his life, early in his, I don't know. But if it was something that was written later in his life, I wonder if it's more like testimony off of the mistakes that he made. Like, he has seen, I can say that for my own life. Like, there's things that I say or recommend or whatever do now that is because I learned the hard way.
Right.
And what if David is saying this because, like, he did make those mistakes, he did do things that separated him from God's law, and he's saying, like, those things are not treasure. This is what is.
Right.
Like, it's almost like speaking from his own past mistakes. But like I said, I don't know if that.
I don't have that information with me,
I
but we could look it up. We could know.
I'm just curious.
We could
now.
know. It's either after, and he's going, this is
Right.
what I've learned, or it was before.
And then he's going to look back and say, "Ooh, I said that."
I messed up.
Yeah.
Well, in a similar vein, like even for me in real time, I think I catch myself sometimes praying to God, and it might be after I've messed something up or whatever, and I say, like, God, I do love your commands. I do, and I think they're good. Like, I get it wrong, but I see the value in it. And I think what that is for me is kind of like talking about experience in past mistakes and things. And to me, the law can be a challenge, but it itself is good. We talked about that.
Right.
But I think when I was younger, and specifically something that came to mind was, like, if I was hanging out with my friends and we were going to go somewhere else, and I was supposed to let my parents know, or maybe I knew where we were going, I wasn't supposed to be there, and I knew what I was doing was wrong, and all of a sudden it creates this anxiety in me, and I'm nervous. I'm worried about, okay, well, I'm not really doing anything real bad, but what if I get caught? What I did was wrong.
Right.
And all these things start going through my head, and there's just restlessness and anxiety about it, and it's like, this is the framework, though, for not having that anxiety, for not having that
Right.
restless spirit and all those things. Like, it's the law, and
Right.
it's obviously challenging, but
Right.
when we follow that framework, there's peace,
Yeah.
there's health, there's well-being, and I think that experience is kind of what points me to, it's still challenging,
Yes.
but when I use that as the framework for how to live my life, I do find peace and well-being,
Right.
and that creates that love for the law, even if I can't
Right.
keep it fully.
Right.
That's that, I guess, that love connection, that being able to see, like, this is good, and as much as I can follow it, and as much as God will help me to stick to it, I want to.
Right. That's good, Logan. That's really good. And you sitting there saying that, I mean, just like your parents saying, "Let me know,"
Yeah.
it was good. Their law
Yeah.
was good. It was for safety
Right.
and protection, and to know, and it's kind of neat when you look at it from that perspective. And poor David didn't have Jesus yet, and I think about that, because you're saying that it is good. The law is good. It's perfect and it's good. And the framework, I love that you said that. That is such a good mental picture for me of this is how it could be. It should be, but thank God that there's that grace in Jesus.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't. That shouldn't be a reason to not follow the framework, to look at that and go, this is good, and this
Right.
is what I want. And that's that heart, that we keep hearing about David. I guess when I think about David and all this, and because we're actually in the Bible reading about David, and I see all of his mistakes, and in those moments I'm like, he loved God and he was running hard. He had a heart after God, you know. That's me. Sometimes I mess up, but I love the Lord
Yes.
and I love his
Yes.
word. So as we're closing, final thoughts. If you just, what is that one thing that you didn't say or you wanted to say? And you want to make sure that somebody knows what challenges you, what, I don't know. If you have no closing. God is known through his.
Yes. Yeah.
Any thoughts? Closing.
I just think, kind of to tag on sort of what I said, I think kind of as you get to the end and it starts talking there, more desirable than gold and sweeter than honey and all those things. I think in the world that we're in today, I would think that so many of us could use a little more peace,
Yeah.
and a little more of a settled spirit, and I would think that kind of says it, like the value for those things, more precious than gold, more precious than honey. I think just kind of going to God and say, hey, show me how I do this.
Right.
How do I get closer to this this goal so that I can have that peace, I can have that just that settled spirit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
That's
it's
good.
just a reminder for me also that we cannot do it on our own. We can't attain this on our own, and we have to submit our lives to Jesus. Like that is the step that we take. There's definitely been times in my life where I fell short of many times in my life today that I have that I fall short of this, but my perspective now as I've grown as a Christian is that Jesus is who I chase. Jesus is who I love.
Yes.
And he aligns my life to this, not myself.
That's good.
So,
Exactly. Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us as we talk about knowing God through his law. I appreciate it. And in our next podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Psalm 19 and learn more about the benediction and why we say this thing. Thank you, guys.
Yes,
Yep.
ma'am.
Thank you.